Okay, so picture this. God tells a prophet to go buy a brand new clay jar, round up the most powerful leaders in the country, and then, right in front of all of them, just smash it into a million pieces. Well, that's exactly what happens in Jeremiah chapter 19. In this explainer, we are going to walk through this incredibly dramatic prophetic act, verse by verse, to really get what it means for the nation of Judah. So, you've got to ask, why this specific act? Why smash your jar? Well, the answer reveals a really terrifying point of no return for a nation that is right on the brink of total collapse. Let's dive in and see how this all unfolds. All right, first up, a jar and a valley. You'll see that the setting for this whole drama is just as important as the action itself. Now, there's a really critical difference here that you need to catch right away. Just one chapter before, in Jeremiah 18, God is pictured as a potter working with wet, moldable clay, something you can still reshape. But here in chapter 19, verse 1, the command is to get a finished, fired pottery jar. It's hard, it's brittle, and the symbolism is just stark. Once this thing is broken, there is no fixing it. The time for reshaping Judah, it's over. And listen, this is no secret message. God specifically tells Jeremiah to bring the top brass, the civil leaders and the senior priests, to watch. This is a public official indictment. The very leaders who let the nation slide into chaos are now being summoned to hear its official sentence. So verse 2 sends them to a very specific spot, the Valley of the Son of Hinnom, right outside one of the city gates. Now, this wasn't just any old valley. It had a dark, horrifying reputation. By staging this whole thing here, God is making sure the message is public and absolutely impossible to ignore. And deep inside this valley was a place called Tophet. This was the absolute epicenter of Judah's most disgusting sin, the ritual sacrifice of their own children. So the location is the message. The very ground they polluted with this evil is now going to be the stage for their judgment. In fact, this valley's name, Hinnom, eventually became the word Gehenna, a powerful symbol for hell itself. So that brings us to our next section, the blood of innocents. Why such an extreme final judgment? Well, God's public charge sheet lays out exactly why. The prophecy in verse 3 kicks off with this chilling phrase, "The news of what's coming will make people's ears tingle." This was basically biblical code for a message so shocking, so completely horrifying, that just hearing about it would feel like a physical blow. This wasn't just another military loss. This was an unthinkable national catastrophe. Verse 4 then lays out three specific charges. First, apostasy. They straight up abandoned the God who made a covenant with them. Second, syncretism. They filled the land with all sorts of foreign gods. And third, the absolute worst of it all, blood guilt. They had, in God's own words, filled this place with the blood of innocents, talking directly about those child sacrifices that stained the land. And just to be crystal clear, verse 5 has one of the most forceful denials in the entire Bible. Speaking about the altars they built to burn their own children, God says it was something he commanded not, neither came it into my mind. This wasn't some kind of misunderstanding on their part. It was a vile, unthinkable evil, an idea so perverse it was totally alien to the very character of God. Okay, so now the prophecy pivots. It moves from the crime to the punishment. And in this terrifying moment of poetic justice, you're about to see how the punishment is designed to perfectly mirror the sin. As verse 6 declares, the very name of this place is getting a rebrand. It won't be called Tophet, the place of sacrifice, anymore. From now on, it will be the Valley of Slaughter. The ground they stained with the blood of their children will soon be filled with their own dead bodies, cut down by invading armies. Then in verse 7, God says he will make void the counsel of Judah. What does that mean? It means all their clever political moves, all their military alliances with Egypt, all their defensive plans for the city, they're all going to collapse into nothing. Their human wisdom is about to be proven completely useless against the Babylonians. Verse 8 goes on to say Jerusalem itself will become a ruin and a hissing. This meant it would become an object of shocked mockery. People passing by would literally hiss in disbelief at the sheer scale of its destruction. The city that was supposed to be a light to the world would become a grim cautionary tale. And then comes the most gruesome detail of all. Verse 9 predicts that the coming siege will be so long and the famine so terrible that people will resort to cannibalism, even eating their own children to survive. But here's the thing.
This wasn't some random, out-of-the-blue punishment. It was the direct fulfillment of covenant curses written down centuries before in the books of Leviticus and Deuteronomy. God had warned his people from the very beginning that this was the ultimate consequence for turning their backs on him completely. The key takeaway here: they had been warned. Which brings us to our final section, a verdict made of clay. This is the climax. This is the moment where the symbol becomes a terrifying, shattering reality.
In verse 10, God gives the final command: break the bottle. Right there, in full view of the leaders who just heard this entire horrifying prophecy, Jeremiah lifts the clay jar and smashes it to pieces on the ground. The meaning is absolutely unmistakable. Verse 11 spells it out. Just as this shattered jar can never be repaired, so God will break the people and the city of Jerusalem. For this generation, the judgment is final. It is irreversible. The nation, as they know it, is finished. And this judgment won't miss anyone. Verses 12 and 13 make it clear the destruction will cover the entire city, from the rooftops where they burnt incense to idols, all the way to the palaces of the rich and powerful. No one, from the common person to the king himself, is exempt. Jeremiah then walks back from that cursed valley and stands in the temple court to deliver the final word. The reason for all this, as verse 15 says, is because they have hardened their necks. This isn't about them not knowing better. It's about stubborn, willful rebellion. It's about a deliberate, conscious refusal to listen. And you know what? This was not an empty threat. History tells us this prophecy was fulfilled right down to the letter. Within a single generation, in the year 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar's army sacked Jerusalem, burned the temple to the ground, and dragged the nation into exile, exactly as Jeremiah had foretold. So the parable of the smashed jar leaves us with a really sobering question, doesn't it? This chapter isn't just a piece of ancient history, it's a timeless lesson. It's a reminder that God's judgment rarely just appears out of nowhere. It's so often the final, inevitable result of repeated warnings, unrepentant sin, and hearts that have simply decided to harden themselves and refuse to listen.